You almost never lose a pattern at the moment it becomes obvious. You lose it much earlier. You lose it when the first small sign appears, feels harmless, and gets dismissed because it looks too minor to matter. A conversation leaves you slightly contracted. A decision that should feel clean feels strangely heavy. A simple task becomes overcomplicated for no clear reason. You tell yourself it is nothing. Then weeks later, the larger consequence arrives, and now it has a name: burnout, compromise, drift, self-betrayal, repetition. By then, the structure is already harder than it needed to be. So here's the gain in this video. If you understand correspondence the right way, you can read the pattern while it is still small, still soft, still changeable. Most people wait for damage. Correspondence teaches you to read formation. That is the whole power. The mistake is thinking a pattern begins at the large scale. It does not. It begins in miniature. The same structure shows itself in different sizes, different domains, different materials. What appears in a room, a sentence, a habit, a delay, a body state, a relationship choice, may be the same geometry wearing different clothes. That is why small signs matter. Not because life is trying to entertain you with symbols, because the same force tends to reveal itself more than once before it fully hardens. So when people say they were blindsided, often they were not. They were early warned in smaller forms they did not know how to read. Here is a practical example. Someone says yes too quickly when they mean no. At first it looks social. Then the same structure appears somewhere else. They delay one honest conversation. Then somewhere else, they keep making their day heavier to avoid one clean decision. Then somewhere else, they start feeling tired around things that should not be exhausting. Different surface. Same pattern. The outer forms vary. The inner structure repeats. Now ask yourself something simple. What has been repeating lately in different costumes? Not the exact event. The shape. Is it haste? Over-explaining? Quiet resentment? Collapse after visibility? The feeling that every clean choice gets foggy right before you make it? That is where correspondence becomes useful. It stops you from staring at isolated events. It trains you to see the template beneath them. And once you see the template, you stop waiting for the disaster version to confirm what the miniature version already showed. That is the first turn. You are not trying to predict the future. You are trying to identify the structure early enough to stop feeding it. And this is where people often go wrong. They start looking for dramatic signs, rare omens, special moments. But the early reading is usually much more ordinary than that. It is in the tiny distortion. A clean task becomes strangely sticky. A normal interaction leaves a residue. Rest does not restore. A small promise already feels false when you make it. That is the signal. Not because the small event is huge in itself, because it carries the same quality as the larger consequence that will come later if nothing changes. Halfway through, that is where we are. The point is not that everything is a sign. The point is that repeating structure can be seen before it becomes fate-shaped. Now the next question is the important one. How do you tell a real pattern from random noise? You look for repetition of quality, not repetition of object. Not the same number, not the same word, not the same song, the same pressure, the same emotional weather, the same bend in your behavior, the same hidden sentence underneath different situations. That is the difference between superstition and reading. Noise is literal. Pattern is structural. So if before every meaningful step you suddenly become scattered, over-careful, and slightly numb, that matters. If before every necessary ending you become reasonable in a way that quietly betrays your own clarity, that matters. If before every expansion you feel the urge to shrink your standards, lower your voice, and call it peace, that matters. Because the larger outcome is already rehearsing itself in small form. And once you see that, something becomes much easier. You stop arguing with the surface. You stop saying, This conversation is the problem. This week is the problem. This person is the problem. You begin asking a better question. What is the sane structure trying to become here? That question changes everything because it returns leverage to you. Now you are not trapped in effects. You are back at cause. You are reading the pattern where it is still light enough to move. That is the relief hidden inside this law. You do not need to wait until your whole life is shouting. You can listen when it is still whispering. And the whisper is often kinder, much kinder. It says, this is beginning again. This shape is returning. Do not feed it just because it is familiar. That is why correspondence can actually make you feel better, not more paranoid. It makes life more readable. It reduces helplessness. It shows that large suffering often has a smaller doorway. And if there is a doorway, there is also a chance to step differently. So here is the clean reframe I want to leave you with. Do not wait for the big consequence to grant reality to the small sign. The small sign was already real. It was simply smaller. Read the miniature. Read the repeated quality. Read the early distortion. Because the earlier you read the pattern, the less force is needed to change it. And that may be the most merciful thing about this principle. Life often shows you the structure before it locks. If this kind of work speaks to you, like and subscribe. And the next time something feels small but strangely familiar, do not rush past it. You may be looking at the whole pattern in its first visible form.